Welcome to the Pacific Economic Cooperation Youth Conference 2012 Interschool Debate Competition on Asia-Pacific Affairs, Grand Final. I'm Jacqueline, the chairperson. Today, we are honored to invite Professor Judy Choi, the Vice President of International and Executive Education, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Mr. Paul Chan, the Political Assistant to the Secretary for Food and Health. Mr. Christopher Ho, the Convener of Roundtable Econsel. The debate competition would adopt British parliamentary style, which is the internationally recognized debating format, and the format used at the premier international debating event, the World Universities Debating Championship. Two teams are on both the government, affirmative side, and opposition, negative side. Today, the motion is, this House believes that FTA benefits local economics. Competing schools are St. Rose of Lima's College, the opening government. Diocesan Girls' School, the opening opposition. St. Paul's Convent School, the closing government. Belilios Public School, the closing opposition. The speaking order alternates between the two sides, and the order of the debate is therefore Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Member for the Government, Member for the Opposition, Government Whip, Opposition Whip. Speeches are 6 minutes in length. Speakers may accept and respond to the points of information, impromptu questions raised by opposing teams within the unprotected time. Chairperson will give the signals to indicate the start and the end of points of information allowed period. The first and last minutes are protected time. No point of information may be made during this time. It is advisable to accept no more than 2 points of information in each speech. Within the 4-minute unprotected time, the point of information made by the opposing team cannot exceed 15 seconds, and each team will have 15 seconds of buffer time to respond to the point of information. Within the 15 seconds buffer, no point of information should be made. 2 best debaters in the final may be honored to be our youth delegates. A total of 8,000 book coupon will be awarded for the finalists. So I now call forth the Prime Minister to give her speech.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Due to the slow progress in global trade talks, more and more countries have signed free trade agreements with one another. And today, we are gathered here to discuss whether the free trade agreement benefits the local economies. First of all, free trade agreement is an international treaty which aims at removing the barriers to trade, facilitating stronger trade and commercial ties, and increasing economic integration between the participating countries. The scope of participating countries can be as wide as an entire region with multiple nations, or as narrow as 2 economies only. As a result, the FTAs among countries will not be exactly the same, but they do contain the similar features. For example, tariffs are lowered and quotas are raised between countries to reduce the barriers to export and import goods and services. It is clear that today's motion must stand because free trade agreements bring benefits to local economies in three ways. First, attract more foreign investment. Second, create more job opportunities. And third, increase the competitiveness of the local products. First, FTA helps to attract foreign investment. Before signing FTA, once market is closed and there is no ways for the foreign capital to understand the local situation, not to mention investing into the economies. However, signing FTA can show one's willingness to open up. Therefore, after signing FTA, the foreign capital will invest in this newly expanded market so as to maximize their profit. According to a book named Effects of North American Free Trade Agreement on Agriculture and the Rural Economy, written by John Link, the rules in the FTA strengthen the rights of foreign investors to retain profit and returns. Equal treatment to foreign and domestic investors is also guaranteed. Thus, it is common to find FTA attract more foreign investment under these favorable terms. Let me cite an example to illustrate a bit more. Since the implementation of the U.S.-Colombia Free Trade Agreement in 2006, Colombia had attracted $10.6 billion in 2008, $9 billion in 2007. In 2010, the foreign direct investment also reached $6.8 billion. This example clearly shows that the local economy of Colombia benefits from the FTA by attracting more foreign investment. Yeah?
Don't you agree that in order to attract investment, there's constant pressure on countries to relax both social and economic regulations, which will lead to exploitation of workers and abuse of the environment? Don't you think that this is not benefit to the economy?
Okay, I understand your meaning, but actually that's not true. As in one of the argument in the agreement in the FTA, the Trans-Pacific Partnership signed between the U.S. and the 8 nations, such as Korea and Panama in 2010, that discussed about the labor's working standard and the workers' right and how to boost more local businesses. The agreement was signed by 26 corporations, and the most important of all, the states of South Carolina and other countries also agree that the content of the FTA is actually fair to the working class and the local businesses. So back to my speech. Secondly, FTA helps to create more job opportunities. As I've mentioned before, signing FTA shows one's willingness to open up. Actually, trade open-ups create new jobs because it facilitates the integration of local companies in global. Yeah?
Are you aware that because of FTAs, therefore each year, more than 200,000 jobs in the United States are actually outsourced to other countries, worsening the unemployment problem?
Actually, FTA, this is mainly because of the multinational corporations. Is it like this? So maybe let me continue first. Because actually FTA brings positive competition among labor, and when they compete with different nations in order to get their job, this will enhance.
Order.
Okay, then as a result, today's motion must stand. Thank you.
I now call forth the leader of the opposition to give her speech.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The government has suggested a number of benefits, and we agree that there are effects brought by the FTA. However, are these benefits really for the local economy? Today, side opposition are going to prove to you that these benefits are neither to all countries, nor it is to the local economy at large. In my speech, I will first explain why the diplomatic nature of FTA would be harmful to both countries signing the FTAs and the countries excluded from the FTAs. Then, I will show you how FTAs would benefit the rich of the economy at the expense of the poor. My second speaker, Avis, will further extend the case in explaining the detrimental effects of over-dependent economies caused by FTAs. But before I start my speech, let me first rebut some points that the Prime Minister has talked about. First of all, she said that because of FTAs, countries will be opened up for more foreign investment. However, they did not look at, because of opening up to foreign investment, there will be increase in more competition, such that other cheaper foreign products will threaten the local industries. And how can they justify this will benefit the local economy? Now back to my speech. FTAs are exclusive promises between countries signing them. This means that they have the favor that the countries in the agreement while discriminating against those who aren't. An example is the South African Customs Union, where FTAs between the members included a common tariff against non-member states. Now there are two detriments of such agreements. Firstly, the trade barriers brought to member states would be limited, since imports from more efficient countries would be discriminated against. Furthermore, this may also trigger a series of protectionism among rival FTA alliances, thus sparking trade wars. A famous example are the banana trade wars back in the 1980s, where the FTAs among EU states included a preferential trade policy for its former colonies. This meant that European countries had to buy bananas from its colonies rather than cheaper and perhaps better bananas from Southern America. To make matters worse, it also sparked a series of retaliation trade policies from the US and other countries. Hence, the diplomatic characteristic of FTAs may make them detrimental to the economies signing them, as well as those who don't. Another important detriment of FTAs is unemployment. With FTAs, jobs may be outsourced to other countries, creating massive unemployment in local economies. The unemployment often happens for people with low labor skills. Can you wait for a second? Not only are they the poor segments of the economy, but also the people who will find the hardest time in switching jobs. For example, even the United States Trade Representatives, a lobbying group for FTAs, have conceded that in signing the NAFTA, over 1 million jobs will be displaced in America by cheaper labor in Mexico. Yes?
You mentioned the unemployment that would be occurred due to FTAs. However, through macroeconomic policies like fiscal and monetary policies, an economy will be stable and there would be less unemployment. Even if there is unemployment, it is actually fine because free trade policies...
Thank you for your question. However, ladies and gentlemen, what she has said is not because of FTAs, so it's actually not to the point. Back to my speech. Furthermore, FTAs will also harm the local businesses. Smaller local businesses will be displaced by larger and more efficient multinational corporations. However, the dominance of large multinational corporations will also create monopolies, exploitation, a loss of diversity, and other problems to local economy. Examples of this can be seen in China, where Walmarts are beginning to displace many local grocery stores. Now, the government has talked about the benefits brought to the consumers. And yes, we acknowledge that FTA somehow benefits parts of the population, mainly to the large multinational corporations and monopolies which have enough capital to invest in foreign countries. However, as we have proven to you that the unemployment and the closure of local businesses mainly harms the middle and lower class of the economy, which are the majority of the population. We believe that the harms outweigh the benefits. Even if the overall numbers may just be a plus, we believe that the allocation of resources is a fundamental aspect of local economy. And thus, in general, FTAs bring more detriments than benefits. Apart from an unequal distribution of resources, FTAs also have major detriments to consumers. By opening up foreign markets, foreign demand will increase. Hence, supply to the local economy may decrease as a result, giving rise to the problem of domestic shortages. Building on this is the problem of distortion of consumption pattern. As the purchasing power for stronger countries is higher than those of poorer countries, producers in local economies would often respond to the demands of richer countries. This usually means an increase in production of luxury goods at the expense of necessities. As a result, the resources used to produce basic products for the local population, such as rice, will be replaced by luxury goods for foreign markets, such as meat. For example, in Botswana, where an FTA was made with the United States concerning beef imports, minor grain fields were used by McDonald's as pasture land. What used to be an acre to support the staple diets of dozens is now to turn to feed a single cow for a tasty Big Mac. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we have proven you that the benefits of FTA are simply overstated, therefore, this side opposition is proud to oppose. Thank you.
I now call forth the Deputy Prime Minister to give her speech.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, I would like to clarify some misconceptions made by our opposition party. I guess you misunderstand our point. We mean mutual benefits is not only to the multinational companies. For example, some small business in developing countries can actually enjoy technology transfer by the developed countries. And the trade agreement between China and Taiwan successfully improved its economy, increased the export rates over 5%. Secondly, you mentioned about the dumping and the subsidies problem. We admit that just like any policies in this world, FTA has its own negative impacts brought by it, but and also its own limitation. However, we can't neglect that there is a way to solve this problem. For example, if country A is deeply discontent about the dumping problem caused by country B, A can complain to the International Trading Center and detailed investigation can be carried out. If ITC finds out that the dumping problem is indeed violating the anti-dumping agreement, relative action will be carried out to improve the situation. Thus, when the limitation and the negative impact can actually be solved, and there are a lot of benefits that brought by FTA, to this motion should be stand. Moreover, competitions allow the corporation to improve themselves and attract the consumers again. This is a theory of survival of the fittest. Some local firms must survive. They can fight back these cheap products by improving their product's quality. In other words, it acts as a means to force the local business to improve its quality. Thus, when these products are exported, more revenues can be generated. Secondly, you mentioned about the unemployment problem. However, in order to help all the workers to adapt to the rapidly changing economy, U.S. President Obama updates the existing system of the trade adjustment assistance by extending it to the service centers, creating flexible education accounts to help the workers, and also improving the retraining assistance for workers in sectors. Moreover, more trade actually helped to provide more job opportunities. In 1996, the unemployment rate of Morocco is 15.5%. However, after signing the bilateral FTA between Morocco and US in 2006, the average unemployment rate actually plummets drastically to 9.4%. Moreover, unemployment can be caused by many other factors, for example, the financial crisis. So when one country's numbers of unemployment increase, it may not necessarily be caused by FTA. As our Prime Minister has already introduced to you the purpose of the free trade agreement, and the first two benefits brought by it, I would like to talk about the third benefit, that is, it raises the competitiveness of the exported products. It is actually a simple economic concept. Before signing FTA, different countries will impose tariff or quota or a variety of government regulations on the imported goods. These protection policies aims at pushing up the price of the imported goods. Yes.
Yes, you said that before in your rebuttal, because of the survival of the fittest, that's why the larger companies can enjoy a profit. However, when you say the survival of the fittest, it means that the unfit will die in a way, like they will close down. So in developing countries, those unfit local businesses will be closed down. How do you justify that?
No, I mean that because, yes, I agree that when some multinational countries enter, for example, another countries, and then some local business will be close down because of the stronger companies. However, some local business must survive, and then they can improve their product qualities, and then when they export their products, then they can generate a greater benefits. So back to my speech. So the local consumer will try to buy the locally produced goods. Indeed, local economies are fully protected, but the local economies may not be fully benefit in such a closer economy. But after signing the FTA, countries will compromise amongst each others and to agreeing to lower the tariff or minimizing the restriction on the imported goods. And the exported goods become more competitive, and the door to the worldwide market has been opened. FTA creates...
ma'am.
Yes.
We see that from 1993 to 2002, the jobs gained by NAFTA in US was up to 7,900. However, the jobs destroyed by NAFTA was 2 times that amount. So free trade is actually creating net unemployment. How do you justify that?
But then, but FTA lead to offshoring of the jobs because of the multinational corporation. FTA actually brings positive competition between laborers, and they can compete with laborers of different nations to getting jobs. This enhances the quality of the laborers and enhances the quality of the products, benefiting the local economies. And so back to my message. Let me use Chile as an example. In 2004, a bilateral free trade agreement was signed between Chile and the European Free Trade Association. Before signing FTA, the GDP of Chile is slow due to the recession was slowed to 2.8% and experienced a period of recession. However, after signing the FTA, the total export of Chilean food grew by 42% in 5 years, and sales even climbed to US 1,600 billion in 2010. Thus, today's motion must be stand. Thank you.
I now call for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to give her speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever thought why a global financial crisis would be called a financial tsunami? It is because a financial crisis does not only affect only one country, but it is like waves washing countries after countries, as these countries are linked together by FTAs. But before I go into talking about how FTAs would increase economic instabilities which harms local economies, let us look at what the government has given us today so far. Firstly, they told us about how FTA could increase foreign investment. However, according to Latin American Economic Journal, they said that there's no direct correlation between trade and foreign investment. But even if we concede that there is increase in foreign investment, we don't think it is beneficial to the local economy, because the money generated will not go back to the local economy, but will flow out of the local economy back to the foreign investors. For example, Mexico, one of the members of the North American Free Trade Agreement. We see that now there is high concentration of investment from foreign investment that now controls the local economy. So basic companies, for example, water and electricity, has now become denationalized. So ladies and gentlemen, how is that good for local economies? Secondly, they talk about competition, how competition can improve the local economy. However, we think that it is too idealistic, because look at the reality. Competition actually drives our local industry and leads to unemployment. For example, the cases in Colombia, we see that the competition from US imports actually generate losses to local industry. And in the cases of Mexico, because they open up the market, so the imports of US corn actually leads to more than 2 million of farmers being unemployed. And therefore, we see that competition is actually bad for local economies.
POI, ma'am?
No, thank you. Thirdly, they talk about how free trade creates jobs, which is not true. Because look at the reality. What free trade does is that jobs are being transferred from developed countries to developing countries, where there is less costly. But even if jobs are created, they will just be low-paid jobs, as specialization pushes down the wages after pushes down the wages, which is what specialization is all about. And this will certainly not help local economies to develop sustainably.
Why, ma'am?
And a second, ma'am, which is why we don't think that it is beneficial to local economies, yes?
In FTA, foreign investment and technology is actually transferred to developing country. How comes you don't understand the benefits it may bring?
Yes, although developing countries may learn from the businesses. However, we don't think it is too beneficial because under specialization, we see that it is the breaking down of process. So the developing countries will only learn some low skills. For example, you see the case in Foxconn, the workers just repeatedly doing the same process. So we don't see how it is actually going to improve the local economies. Now back to my speech. No, thank you. As mentioned by the opening opposition, free trade leads to specialization. So countries will trade with other countries which specialize at producing certain goods. As a result, local economies will become extremely dependent on global markets, which increase domestic economic instability as it decreases the self-sufficiency of a nation, so that a crisis in a significant trade partner country can directly affect the economy of the home country.
POI, ma'am?
No, thank you. Let us look at this example of the Australia-United States Free Trade Agreement signed in 2004, which aimed to eliminate tariffs on 99.5% of all trade between the two countries, making USA the third largest country for Australian exports. Yet, economic recession in 2007 in the United States leads to decreased demand for Australian exports. This falling income in export leads to decrease in Australia's GDP and worsen unemployment problem. In fact, the National Institute of Economic and Industrial Research of Australia found that the agreement could cost Australian economy up to $50 billion and more than 200,000 jobs, which further proves my first speaker's point, no thank you, about outsourcing of jobs and unemployment. Also, the International Monetary Fund has also showed that FTI, no thank you ma'am, would strengthen the Australian economy, proving how FTA would actually worsen local economies. FTA make countries more reliant on one another, creating a domino effect in times of financial crisis, making the local economy of the home country suffer when its free trade partner is in an economic downturn. Therefore, it is clear that FTAs increase economic instability for a country, which certainly does not benefit local economies. Ladies and gentlemen, my first speaker has shown you how free trade agreements worsen unemployment, causes local shortages, while I have shown you how free trade agreements increase economic instability. Apparently, it is side opposition who knows the full picture of local economies, who understands the harms of FTAs principally and the real consequences that FTAs have brought, all of protected time, to local economies, whether developed or developing countries. And for this, we're proud to oppose. Thank you.
I now call forth the member for the government to give her speech.
Good morning, honorable adjudicators, opponents, and members of the audience. As member for the government, I am here to propose. Before I begin my speech, let me respond to what the opposition side has just mentioned. You said that increased domestic economic instability from international trade cycles as economies become dependent on global markets. However, macroeconomic policies can be used continuously to stabilize an economy such that the harm from the domestic instability will not affect the economy. Moreover, according to the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Australia's ratios in imports and exports to the GDP have risen every year. The size of its imports and export sectors are greater than 20% of Australia's GDP. Australia also has a high international demand. Therefore, demand for Australian raw materials such as coal and iron ore have increased exponentially, leading to expansion. You also said that local economies would be over dependent on foreign trade. So do you have any data to confirm this? Now, in addition to what the upper government has mentioned before, as trade is created, more goods and services would be available, thus boosting and benefiting a local economy. An economy comprises of both small and medium-sized enterprises, also known as SMEs, and multinationals. And as they continue to progress, this benefits its respective local industry such that the GDP of an economy would increase. Therefore, the FTA ensures mutual benefits within economies of trade. Yes.
You've said how that with FTAs, there will be an increase in demand for products, but an increase in demand first doesn't mean an increase in prices and doesn't mean an increase in profits, and hence does not mean economic benefits. Thank you.
When there is an increase in demand, according economic laws, when there is an increase in demand, therefore the price of products will decrease, and therefore consumers in that local economy would be able to better afford more products within the same amount of real income that they have. Now, take the example of the ACFTA as an example, also known as the Association of South China East Asian Nations China Free Trade Agreement, which is one of the world's largest free trade agreements. As of January 2010, the combined The combined GDP was 6.6 trillion US dollars and total trade amounted to 4.3 trillion US dollars. This clearly shows that all member countries can experience good economic conditions through the establishment of an FTA. With the growth in the overall GDP, SMEs would also benefit because the amount of government welfare available for them would increase and SMEs would be able to support themselves in the long run. Ladies and gentlemen, in the long run. Secondly, countries which involve free trade specialize in industries which have comparative advantage, meaning that output can be produced at a lower marginal and opportunity cost. With specialization, countries can take advantage of increased efficiency as a result of economies of scale and increased output. SMEs in these industries will benefit and raise productivity and output.
Ma'am.
Yes.
Exactly. We see that with specialization, there is outsourcing of job, and you have not responded to our point.
Well, if you take the China-Indonesian FTA for an example, in January 2010, Indonesia's exports to China increased to $11.14 billion from 2006 with an annual growth rate of 21%. By the end of the year, more than 1,000 Chinese companies had invested $6 billion, creating 30,000 jobs. So how can you say that FTAs increase unemployment instead of increasing employment? Now, many Middle Eastern countries, such as Qatar, are rich in commodities such as oil, whereas we also have countries like Japan that have very few raw materials. With free trade between Japan and Qatar, both countries would benefit from each other as they exchange commodities, creating a win-win situation. From such trade, foreign currencies received from exports can be used for imports, resulting in foreign exchange gains of that particular economy. For example, after the earthquake in Japan last year, the government of Qatar pledged to provide Japan with an increased amount of liquefied natural gas so as to ensure that Japan has the basic necessities up and running for redevelopment in the aftermath of the quake. Moreover, consumers also benefit as they have wider choices and a greater variety of goods and services. As export tariffs are lowered, exported products will become cheaper in foreign countries, and demand for them will increase. To meet this higher demand of exports, export firms will raise production and thus employ more workers. Therefore, employment rate rises and and trade liberalization brings about economic welfare because economic growth is stimulated and the employment rate rises. An FTA would also bring about increased competition. With more trade, domestic firms will face more competition. As such, many SMEs will have the incentives to cut costs and increase efficiency while making sure that the quality of the product do not deteriorate but rather remains the same. This prevents SMEs and multinational companies from turning into monopolies, but at the same time ensuring a steady supply and reasonable cost of a good or service. One example are Canadian SMEs that benefit from the EU FTA. There was a 20% boost in their bilateral trade. In 2008, Canadian SMEs were exporting approximately $16 billion worth of goods and services to the EU. Finally, with all these benefits, people would have increased real incomes, and economies will have higher growth rates due to competition, increased productivity, efficiency, and production levels. Ladies and gentlemen, for the betterment of the local economies and the livelihoods of the working force, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
I now call forth the member of the opposition to give her speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, closing opposition would like to show you why free trade fails to realize true economic benefits by telling you how it can potentially be turned into a lose-lose game between developed and developing countries. My partner will focus on developing countries, while I will be talking about the economic impact on developed countries in 3 aspects, namely, worsened trade deficit, its effects on workers' wages in developed nations, and the widening of the rich-poor gap. Thus, free trade will lead to trade deficit as the production center shifts to developing countries due to lower cost. There will be the import of goods back into the domestic market of developed countries. As the amount of imports keep on increasing, it will exceed the export of the country and lead to trade deficit. An example is, since the United States entered NAFTA with Mexico and Canada, its trade deficit with these signatories has grown rapidly from $9 billion to $98 billion within a decade. US firms moved plants to Mexico and Canada to take advantage of the lower wages and rules, providing unheard of levels of protections for foreign investors. The combined US trade balance with the other 2 NAFTA countries was a small, stable deficit prior to NAFTA. Since NAFTA was implemented, the combined deficit has grown rapidly. These evidence that deficits with Mexico and Canada are a continuing drag on US growth and job creation, thus the economy. An ongoing trade deficit is detrimental.
Hyman?
Yes.
You cannot just say that because of NAFTA, a country could be suffering from trade deficit, but because they're actually just suffering from trade deficit. Thank you.
We're not saying that because of NAFTA, a nation suffers from trade deficit. It's that because of free trade agreements, the problem of trade deficit has worsened.
But NAFTA is a kind of free trade agreement, right?
It worsened the problem. Now back to my speech. And it's detrimental to an ongoing trade deficit is detrimental to a nation's economy in the long term because it's financed with debt. In other words, the country can buy more than it makes because the country that it buys from are lending it the money. When one day the lending countries decide to ask the country to repay the debt, and the party is over. Unless free trade is lifted, unless trade balance is duly adjusted, unless the country retreats itself from this import-oriented trading mechanism, economic viability remains low.
POI, ma'am.
Point, ma'am.
You said that.
No, thank you. The second point is that free trade lowers the bargaining power of workers' unions, as employers can threaten to reallocate or outsource their production to
Point,
those
ma'am.
who can. Yes.
Have you neglected that FTA can actually help to attract foreign investment?
In the competition to attract investment, there is a constant pressure on countries to relax both social and environmental regulations, especially in poor countries. This leads to unfettered exploitation of workers and abuse of the environment. These resources can be used much more efficiently. Besides, the investors would earn profit to lower their costs. They will invest in countries with the lowest cost. The countries would get less money from investment.
Hyman.
No, thank you. As I have mentioned, the ability of bargaining of the workers' unions with their employers who will threaten to reallocate or outsource their production to those who can bear even lower wages. This threatens the livelihood of the workers. This had been admitted by US employers, as it was shown in a Wall Street Journal survey in 1992 that almost 1/4 of almost 500 American corporate executives polled admitted that they were very likely or somewhat likely to use NAFTA as a bargaining chip to lower
Why,
wages.
ma'am?
No, thank you. This means that with lower wages, the purchasing power of the workers drop. Thus, the economy cannot benefit through increased consumption in the retail market. This also leads to the widening of rich-poor gap. Free trade widens the rich-poor gap in developed countries. For example, in a developed country, the owner of the factory gets richer as they seek lower production cost, while the workers get poorer as their wages continue to remain low, while the prices of products rise as the inflation rises. No. Thank you. As the rich-poor gap continues to widen, the economy will have an unbalanced development. The wealthy earns more capital, which continues to increase as companies can now produce with the lowest cost. However, those who are not wealthy cannot benefit from free trade. Open trade in the US resulted in replacement of manufacturing jobs for service jobs, which pay less on average. The product trade deficit results in more investment money flowing into the US as a trade-off. The investment money mostly ends up with wealthy investors and owners, and trickle-down is not sufficient to compensate for the loss of jobs and wages. Even though free trade may increase gross national production, the increases do not flow to rank and file workers.
Why, ma'am?
It's protected time. Ladies and gentlemen, our opponents have only focused on the benefits of exports, yet they neglected the negative impacts that imports bring about. Free trade led to trade deficit, and then the lowering of wages in terms of reduced consumption in the retail market and a wider rich-poor gap, resulting in an unbalanced economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, free trade agreements cannot benefit local economies. Thank you.
May I now call forth the government whip to give her speech.
Good morning. I'm the government whip. First, let me respond to what the lower opposition has just mentioned. You mentioned that trade would lead to a less equal distribution of income in developed and undeveloped countries. However, trade provides consumers with a greater variety of choices. Everyone is involved in competition. Obviously, the distribution of wealth cannot be equal, but the differences in equality are minimal. You also mentioned that there is a rich-poor gap. However, it is not unfair because according to the case of the Colombia, major trading partner with USA, by 2007, their GDP grew over 8% and is actually among the highest in Latin America. Colombia is much poorer than the USA, but this was no deterrent to the Colombia's progress and economic development. You also mentioned that free trade can lead to pollution and environmental problems. However, problems would still occur even if there is no trade with or without the FTA. Environmental problems can be solved through legislation instead that can decrease harm to the environment. Therefore, a decrease in external costs will increase external benefits. Let's see what the upper government has actually given us today. The upper government has mentioned several benefits brought by the FTA, including the foreign direct investment, as by joining FTA signifying its willingness to open to international market, attracting foreign investment. An example is the Colombia USA, which I just mentioned, which the FTA... no, thank you. The Colombia has increased for several years, such as over 8% in 2007. They also have mentioned that job opportunities would be created and trade opens up, meaning that, yes?
How is shutting down of local businesses beneficial to local economies when we see that it is consequences by FTAs?
Well, if one business closes, another would obviously open. And it is still okay because products and services would have another standard, as therefore consumers will have a better variety of choices and their quality of goods and services in a particular economy will be improved. Back to my speech. The member of government... no, thank you. The member of the government has mentioned that the free trade agreement leads to trade creation and urges countries to take use of comparative advantage, in which different economies enjoy efficiencies, including those of emerging markets. Together with the use... no, thank you. Together with the use of specialization, this would lead to increased output as well as GDP, such that a particular economy would see growth. This improves employment rates due to trade liberalization. As free trade agreement between two countries benefits both economies, as free trade means removal of tariffs. As such, the cost of imports will decrease. By the same token, we can expect an increase in free trade also influence commodity prices, such as the prices of oil, and help gains from foreign exchange in imports and exports. With the FTA and high imports, local markets and an economy will intensify competition of goods and services. Standards of goods and services will need... Yes.
Do you agree that an economy is not just about consumers, but also about producers and local as a whole as well?
But on the other hand, we also have the government who can actually encourage or even help these suppliers or producers through the use of subsidies, which is one form of protectionism. Back to my speech, we can see our agricultural industry in China. From this example, vegetables from local farms compete with imported organic vegetables. No, thank you. This implies lower prices for consumers for better quality products.
Point, ma'am.
No, thank you. The free trade agreement does not only bring economic benefits to local economies, but the partnership and cooperation can improve the relationship between the countries concerned, as these countries work together towards a mutual benefit through the development and implementation of free trade. The upper opposition has actually mentioned that the harms outweigh the benefits, but you're actually acknowledging that the FTA has benefits and can benefit the local economy. Ladies and gentlemen, the case is definitely clear.
POI, ma'am.
No, thank you. We have proven how the FTA can benefit local economies through looking at real cases and examples. It is clearly evident that there is an increased number of free trade agreements amongst different countries. This means that both countries, at both global and local levels, will continue to grow, stabilize, and prosper in the future. Therefore, we're proud to propose. Thank you.
I now call forth the opposition whip to give her speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, the member of opposition has already told you about the impacts of FTAs on developed countries, and in my speech, I will show you how FTAs impact developing countries. Potential losses are larger than actual gains. But first, allow me to deliver some rebuttals. Our opponents have told you today that with FTAs, there'll be a larger variety of products. However, we disagree. FTAs are intrinsically protectionist. They give incentives to insiders, but they create barriers for non-signatories. FTAs effectively block imports of competing goods from non-FTA economies, which actually reduces the variety of products on the market and cuts consumers off from cheaper and perhaps superior competing products from different FTAs and raise prices that consumers will have to pay. Our opponents have also mentioned the point of comparative advantage. However, comparative advantage is actually unfair because the gains are not equal with how much you spend. The developed nations are getting a lion's share of gains at the expense of exploiting developing countries. The playing field is not level. Ladies and gentlemen, no thank you. Our opponents have mentioned how competition is beneficial for employment and also for companies. However, in US, people are happy to work for $10 an hour. However, in developing countries, people are happy to work for $10 a day. How can they compete? Obviously, we can see unemployment in developed countries, and this is...
POI, ma'am?
No, thank you. This is not beneficial to their economies. The economy is not only made up of the rich or the poor, it's made up of both. And for the economy to benefit, both must benefit. Ladies and gentlemen, our opponents have said that free trade has its benefits. And yes, we agree.
POI, ma'am?
Yes.
You've mentioned that both developing and non-developing countries will be benefited, but if a developed country invests in a non-developing country in the free trade zone, doesn't it increase employment, which actually benefits them? Thank you.
No, it doesn't increase employment in developed countries because we see outsourcing to developing countries and a loss of jobs in developed countries. Ladies and gentlemen, our opponents have mentioned that there are benefits. We agree there are benefits, but the benefits are so minuscule and the negative impacts are so large that they outweigh the benefits. The opportunity cost of free trade and also the damages done to the environment is much more severe and expensive, and they cannot be covered by the gains.
POI, ma'am?
No, thank you. Now moving on to my substantive. Ladies and gentlemen, free trade does not bring all the benefits it promises. It decreases profits, harms the environment, and puts infant industries at risk. Though trade is encouraged with free trade, this does not guarantee an increase in profits. With free trade, there's more competition. And developing countries cannot compete in terms of quality or quantity, and thus they have no choice but to lower their prices in order to remain competitive, especially in face of dumping from stronger nations. This means fewer profits, reduced market shares, and in some cases even less profits than before the FTAs were implemented. No, thank you. According to Oxfam, after joining NAFTA in 1941, the corn market of Mexico was opened to foreign competition, and there was a great decrease in trade barriers in accordance with PAC terms. However, by 2003, the income of Mexican farmers had decreased by a third compared to 1994, though there was an increase in trade. Increased trade does not equal increased profits, sometimes the opposite. The macroeconomic gains are not totally reflective of reality, and one must probe into trade-offs associated with individual countries. The implementation of free trade is a race to the bottom, meaning that companies and investors avail themselves of economically advantageous market niches by cashing in on low production cost. They would move to places with the lowest wages and the lowest environmental demands, developing countries. Without protectionist
Hi, ma'am.
measures, yes.
If we don't open the markets, that means when the market is closed, how can we sell the local produce product to overseas, and how can
Thank
them
you.
earn money?
Free trade does not, the opposite of free trade agreements is not a closed market. The countries now have the freedom to choose whether to open or close their markets as they wish. Ladies and gentlemen, without protectionist measures, developing countries cannot protect their resources when needed. This would result in both high environmental costs and reduction in the capacity for economic development. With reduction of resources, there's a less capacity for future development, harming both the economy and the economy's chances in the future. This also harms the environment, which costs money. For example, according to the Mexico's National Institute for Statistics, Geography, and Information Systems, the financial cost of environmental degradation between 1988 and 1999 was 10% of the GDP, far overwhelming economic growth, which was only 2.5%. The cost of economic harms is much larger than the gain they receive. Besides, the infant industries of developing countries would also be put at risk because they cannot compete with other international companies. If infant industries cannot mature, the developing countries would remain as providers of raw material and labor force for economically developed countries, as they do not have their own industries. It will be difficult for them to withdraw themselves from the economic clout of developed nations. Ladies and gentlemen, though free trade agreements may have their minuscule benefits, their disadvantages are too significant to be ignored. FTAs harm both developed and developing countries, creating a lose-lose situation. Free trade isn't the same as fair trade. Free trade does not guarantee benefits. Don't be fooled. Thank you.
This is the end of the debate. May I now invite the debaters to leave the stage and let the adjudicators to discuss the result. Thank you.